So once you learn that, it really kind of opens up, you can kind of start to see how a simple rule of thumb, follow these steps, might not work, or there might be flaws in it depending on what your goals are. So they're kind of a necessary evil, but at a certain point, you're going to have to modify them for yourself. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Where it starts to get really interesting is when you're talking about investing for your future. Dave doesn't give a whole lot of input onto what accounts to use and how to structure your investments and how to plan. The FOO does, but I do have some disagreements with it. Alright, hey guys, in today's video I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the Money Guy financial order of operations. This is an idea that was given to me by a friend. Essentially, he texted me a week or two ago asking what my opinion is on, this FOO. Do they call it the FOO? Financial order of operations? Probably. And I thought, I gave him my opinion. I texted him back. Some of the things I agree with and disagree with, but I was going to do a little bit of a comparison to the financial order of operations with Dave Ramsey's baby steps, and just give my thoughts on both, which might be kind of unique because I think anytime you try to build a general plan for a lot of people to follow, it's going to have inherent issues because people's situations are unique. Now the interesting thing is these layouts kind of have to exist for those people who are just starting to learn what they need to learn. Like if you haven't researched it at all, this will give you an idea of the considerations you have to be able to make for yourself and go do that further education. So they're kind of a necessary evil, but at a certain point you're going to have to modify them for yourself. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So we're going to dive right into step number one from the Money Guys is deductibles covered. And that's opposed to, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Dave Ramsey's baby step number one, save $1,000 in your starter emergency fund. I would say deductibles covered is just kind of weird, and it sets the wrong tone right off the bat. If you're really just starting out thinking about insurance, you might have to learn what your deductibles even are. You might want to, it just gets you in the wrong headspace of figuring out, do I have the right insurance? Do I have the right amount? Is my deductible too high or too low? How does that relate to health insurance? Does that mean I have to have my out-of-pocket maximum covered, or just the deductible for the health insurance? Even if, deductibles could stack throughout the year, it adds more questions than are necessary at this step. You really just need money so that if you get a flat tire, you have money to cover your flat tire, right? And so I lean more on Dave Ramsey's side with this one. The way this happens for me and what I do now is, this is basically just keeping a buffer in your checking account. Just keep a few thousand in there and pretend that that's zero. And as you get further on, eventually you'll have your full emergency fund in there. Say it's $15,000, $20,000, and then you just treat that as zero and don't go below that. Number two, on the financial order of operations, I'm probably just going to start calling it FOO, just because it's less of a mouthful, right? Is employer match. And now this is really good. I'm fully on board with Brian and Bo, the Money Guys, compared to Dave Ramsey, because the employer match is money that you can't get unless you participate, and it is the best return you'll probably ever get in your life. We're talking like minimum 50% return, because if you put, a lot of employers, if you put in 3% of your salary, and let's just say that equates to, what's a realistic number? $1,500. They'll match half of that, so they'll give you another $750. And that's the only way you can get it, is if you participate in your 401k and get that match. Now, high interest credit card debt is, let's say, maxes out about 30%. The employer match starts at usually about 50%, sometimes it's 100%, and I've even seen it 200%. And that money is invested, so it's gaining a return from the stock market as well, on top of the return from just the employer match portion. So you're basically a fool to not take that. And the funny thing is, Dave Ramsey would say, don't do that until all your other debt is paid off. It's like, okay, I get the point, but at some point, if if the gain is so much higher than the loss from whatever debt you have instead, it's still worth it to do it, in my opinion. So I'm really happy that the financial order of operations includes that as step number 2. And then 3 and 4, we're kind of getting into this phase where Dave Ramsey and Brian and Bo are basically on the same page. You want to pay off your credit cards, and any high interest, like auto loans usually would be part of this, and start filling out that emergency fund. I don't really know anybody that doesn't agree with the 3 to 6 month emergency fund philosophy. So that stuff's pretty simple. It's all good, all on board. Where it starts to get really interesting is when you're talking about investing for your future. So that's kind of the rest of it, right? So they say Roth IRA, max out employer plans, hyper accumulation, prepay future expenses, and pay low interest debt. And the difference is Ramsey, he's the debt guy, right? Get rid of all debt before you really do any investing. Brian and Bo, they're more on board with do some investing and kind of gauge the value based on the rates and the costs. And what's interesting is Dave doesn't give a whole lot of input onto what accounts to use and how to structure your investments and how to plan. The FOO does, but I do have some disagreements with it. So it depends. This is where it starts to get really individual. It depends on your goals. It's hard to make a standard plan, a standard order that fits, unique situations. So they go with what they think covers most people or enough people that they're trying to communicate. Their fan base. That's not the right word I'm looking for, but like their followers, their customers. So I like that the HSA is mentioned on here because that's a little bit lesser known than your typical Roth IRA and your 401k and your brokerage account and things like that. So I like that that's part of number 5 and the Roth IRA is up there. What I don't necessarily like is max out employer plans. Depending on what you're trying to do, maxing out your employer plans might be putting money in a place that makes it harder to get in the future. And your employer plan might not even be as good as you can do on your own as far as the type of investments you purchase and the expense ratio associated with that investment. So the main example here is if you potentially want to be financially independent or retire before 55, you need money that you can access without some type of penalty before age 55. Now the 401k, 55 is the earliest you can access that money easily. There is ways to get money out earlier than that, but they're really restrictive and they lock you in. And it's called a SEP with 2 P's, substantially equal periodic payments. And it's basically a plan that you can start to avoid the 10% withdrawal penalty. But once you start the plan, you can't stop. Like even if it's 20 years, like you have to stick to it. The IRS won't let you get rid of it. So people don't really like giving up that much flexibility. So if you want to retire at even just age 50, you would need to prioritize like a brokerage account before maxing out your employer plans, because the brokerage account, it doesn't have the same tax benefits, but there's no rules on it. You can access that money whenever you want. And some people say, well, the tax benefit, you have to get that. It's a big deal. Well, if you're living a modest lifestyle, and in 2025, if I remember right, it's if your income in your age 50 early retirement is less than $96,700, your capital gains tax bracket on that brokerage account would be 0% anyway. So it's not even as big of a tax consideration as some people lead you to believe. So if you have a low enough income in retirement, your brokerage account acts almost like a Roth IRA. Almost. There's potential for more taxes in the brokerage account, but if you can keep your expenses reasonable based on the lifestyle that you want to try to live, the tax burden is not as high as you might think. So once you learn that, it really kind of opens up, you can kind of start to see how a simple rule of thumb, follow these steps, might not work, or there might be flaws in it depending on what your goals are. Number 7, I think they admit this further down if you read through their descriptions of the steps, but they say it's not really its own defined step. It kind of just happens when you do the other stuff. Let's see. You can actually complete steps 6 and 7 without maximizing your employer-sponsored accounts. So it's kind of alluding to, it's kind of this unique step that's not really in order. It's more just about hitting that 25% number. Now, I would reserve the name hyperaccumulation for a lot more than just 25%. 25% is a lot, but okay, I wasn't planning on saying this, but there's a term hyperinflation. Hyperinflation pretty much only happens after wars in the country that they were fought in. And what happens is everything's devastated, right? And then the government starts printing tons and tons of money. So like hyperinflation is usually defined by rates similar to prices doubling in a matter of days or even hours sometimes. So we're talking millions and billions of percent in annual inflation. So using hyperaccumulation just seems a little silly to me. I'd reserve it for something closer to like 50%, but I know that's pretty out of the norm. But there's no magic number to 25%. Just like with Dave Ramsey, his is 15%, step number 4. There's no magic number. It's all based on what your income is, how comfortable you can live on whatever dollar amount, and what's the difference there. So the savings rate you want to achieve based on the lifestyle and the time frame you're looking at. So that's highly customizable. There's no magic to that. What else? Yeah, and some of the prepay future expenses. That one's pretty shared between the money guys and Dave Ramsey. That's basically saving for your kids' college. It really depends on your views. Do you even want to pay 100% of your kids' college, or do you want them to have some skin in the game? I know that I don't plan on paying 100% of my kids' college. So that reduces the amount I have to save now. And I'm also not going to push a 4-year degree on them if they don't want one, if they don't need one. I think they're becoming less and less relevant for most jobs. Obviously, like doctors and lawyers and certain things, they're still very relevant. And I think we're going to hit this is kind of speculation, kind of not, but the trades are coming back because a lot of the older generations who are doing the trades are retiring and dying off. And there's a little bit of a need to fill that gap there with younger employees and business owners. So I think, I'm willing to kind of take that risk of not saving quite as much because, one, I don't believe I have to fully fund their education myself, and we don't even know if they'll go that route. So that's just another example of how it really depends on your personal situation and your values and the way you think about things. So what do you do with this information? Really, step 1 is just understanding what you want your money to do for you and kind of knowing where you lie in terms of your lifestyle choices and your goals relative to the kind of the range. So things like early retirement and your kids' college, you'd want to have some idea of what you'd like to do on those areas. And then really it's just learning what accounts are available, what the pros and cons are, and how they relate to those goals. So you'd want to look at benefits today. Benefits today versus benefits in the future, and try to weigh the pros and cons. This typically just comes down to age restrictions and tax treatment. So if you're making quite a bit of money now and you're living a modest lifestyle, chances are you're paying more taxes now than you would if you were just living your modest lifestyle, retired with money coming in off your investments. So you might be in a lower tax bracket later. So that would be a consideration to, optimize Roth contributions versus traditional. But then there's a whole mess of weeds when you start talking about Roth conversions and things like that. So that's where it really helps to talk to someone about it. So I'm going to use this time to invite you guys just to ask all your questions in the comments. And if you're feeling brave, you can email me directly. I like talking about this stuff. If you can't tell, it's what I do for fun, really. It stresses a lot of people out, but I enjoy trying to apply my mind to these tough problems, tough futuristic math problems. So anyway, invite you to ask your questions. But you kind of figure out your goals, learn what you can about the resources that you have available to you, and then you want to run the numbers on your own numbers. So a lot of everyone who is trying to teach this stuff will say, hypothetically, if you do this, 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 you would have X amount by this age and whatever. It's like, yeah, that gets the point across, but it doesn't hit home the same way as seeing it on your real numbers. And that's a lot of what I do with my clients, is basically just build calculators for them to help them see their real numbers, so they can start to transfer that belief of like, well, I know this math works, I know this is out there and people are doing this, but I don't know if it would work for me. And then when they see it, they start to feel like, yeah, it'll work for me. So one interesting example that ties into the last point I want to make about the FOO and the baby steps is Dave Ramsey's famous for paying off your home early. And a lot of other people are like, well, you can earn more in the market, so you might as well play that rate arbitrage game. So one of the calculators that I built recently for someone is just that. Should they pay off their home? Should they invest in the market? Let me see, let me get this open. I have way too many tabs open. And let's see. I've learned that my computer screen makes this stuff look really small on YouTube if I don't zoom in farther than I would prefer to. So I'm going to try to do my best to make this all visible for you guys. Let's make it even a little bit bigger. So it might require quite a bit of scrolling, but we'll do this. So these guys, they wanted to fill up their emergency fund to a comfortable for them level before paying off a car loan. And Dave Ramsey would say, no, that's wrong. Get rid of all that debt. But the funny thing about it is the difference between doing the car loan first and the E-fund, the emergency fund first, is so small that it makes sense just to go with their motivation, like their strong feeling of doing it in this order, because both ways they're going to be way ahead of if they didn't pay off the loan early. So, but once their emergency fund is funded, their car loan is paid off, and their last school loan is paid off, then what happens is we start to look at the house versus investing. So that's these two columns here is the house itself. Now the house normal is, they just got it recently, so they got basically all 30 years left. And if you scroll way down, I'm going to use this slider bar because it's way down there. 30 years is a long time. They're looking at over $250,000 in interest. And if they start to pay it off early with the funds that the cash flow that they're accumulating by paying off their car and their student loan and stuff like that, they have $2,700 a month to apply. They'll finish in, their total interest will only be $57,000, a savings of over $200,000, and instead of it taking 30 years, it's something like a little under 8. I don't have the exact months, but it's under 8 years. It's I think it's 9. Let me go back and get that line. 99, line 99. January, February, March of 2032. 7? Is it under 7? Let's see. So it's June of 25, right? So June of 32, that would be 7 years. So it's under 7 years, I think, right? Double check me on that. Either way, way faster when you pay it off early. Surprise, surprise. But the question becomes, what about investing instead and having that money grow more? One thing to note is that mortgage, I don't know if you can see it on this page, that mortgage is at 5.74% right here. Bing. And now, depending on who you listen to or what you believe about stock market returns, I would say, yeah, the average long-term return of the stock market, accounting for inflation, is more than 5.74%. But how much of a difference is that going to make? So right here under investments, house early, is the scenario where they pay the house off early. And then once the house is paid off, they start investing that same $2,700 plus what they're saving on their mortgage payment. So for the first several years here, you can see this extra contributions column is blank because that money is going towards the house. But then once you scroll down about 7 years, now you got the $2,700 plus the mortgage payment going into your investments. And I ran this out for 30 years because the next kind of set of data here, my head is going to be covering some of the good numbers I think in the future, is if you do the house normal and draw it out for 30 years and invest that $2,700 as soon as you get those first few items done, right? And so if you scroll down 30 years, any guesses on what the difference is? I won't know what you guess. Maybe put it in the comments. Okay, pause, don't cheat, put your guess in the comments. What percent difference do you expect? Which one do you expect to be more? Probably the investments one, right? But by how much? 1%, 10%, 30%? Okay. What ends up happening is if you pay the house off early and invest the difference in 30 years, you'd have 4.59 million. And over here you'd have let's call it 7.5. Just give you that last little bit of rounding. It's a difference of only 3.4%. And the big assumption here is that these investments are earning a steady 7% real return per year with no sequence of returns fluctuations. And so if you have some down years early on, or if you just earn a little bit less than 7.7%, that number just gets even worse. So it's like you already have 4.5 million. Do you really need an extra 100,000 at that point? Just take the guarantee, right? So that's kind of leaning towards Dave Ramsey's side to pay the house off early, but the numbers are different when the rates are lower, like your mortgage rate is better. So like I did this analysis for myself on the 3 mortgages we have, our primary residence and our 2 rentals, and this percent difference is something like 13%. So that's starting to get a little more significant. But I think I'm going to take the guaranteed return and pay the houses off. I'm going to prioritize that more in the future, and you get the cash flow back sooner when you don't have the payments. So that's a pro for retiring early and trying to have a little bit more flexibility on how you live your life. So who knows how long this video is, doesn't really matter, but that's the end of it there. I'm just going to invite you one more time to talk about it in the comments. There's probably other people who have the same questions you do, and let's try to help as many people as we can. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.